Hello and welcome to a special edition of In Conversation With for the Creative Impact Awards 2020. This week we are joined by our CEO and co-founder Ed Foy, who will be discussing the reasons behind Press's plant-based approach and the benefits of a plant-based diet. Hi Ed, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Could you please start by telling us a little bit about your journey and how you came to start Press Health Foods, previously known as Press London?
Georgie, my co-founder, it was actually her idea. We met in America and we both had kind of lived in the States for a prolonged period of time, and me on the East Coast, Georgie on the West Coast, and both had kind of, engaged in the live fast and party hard lifestyle, and had ended up noticing how much the Americans essentially were putting spend and time into managing their diets, and juice being a big part of that really wasn't anywhere in the UK at the time, cold pressed juice. So we went and met the guy who founded the Beverly Hills Juice Bar, which has been around since the 70s. And he kind of talked us through his journey, which obviously has been for such a long time. And he was just amused by the fact that the whole world was picking up on this trend of green juices, cold pressed juices and health. He'd been doing it for 30 years. So we then thought, look, we want to bring that cold pressed juice movement back to the UK, convenient on the go health for people to enjoy, and just generally get people to start treating what they eat with more care, and understand how it would improve their quality of life. So that was 6 long years ago. We started selling out of a bathtub, in an old vintage bathtub that we painted and branded on wheels. And then we launched in Old Street Tube Station. And then since then we had juice bars. Now we, sell to over 700 retailers around the UK. That's everything from soup to juice to our meals to our snacks. And yeah, sell to thousands of customers every month online, which is awesome.
Great, that sounds great. Good story. Why did you make the decision to make Press exclusively plant-based?
Well, obviously at the beginning, our whole focus was around juice. So that was an easy decision at that point. Not many, milk wasn't in the equation, and neither was sort of meat-based products. But as we've done the journey and gone into real food and meals, it's just a no-brainer. I don't even compute how it's even a debate that people have with themselves. We live on a planet that cannot possibly sustain life at the scale that we operate it at if we add in animals into the food chain. It's just an issue of efficiency of movement of energy from the sun to the plants through the food chain. Each step of that chain has an inefficiency quotient, which means that you need to add more energy for each step. If you remove animals from that step, you then suddenly become into a position where we can actually grow enough food to feed the incredible number of people on the planet. Even that's probably in question. But when you look at the statistics, if you look at the percent of agricultural farming that is done to feed livestock to then either be in the dairy industry or in the meat industry, I think the majority of what we grow goes through that food chain. It doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. So what is a great thing is there is no future of this planet where meat doesn't, where the consumption of animal-based products doesn't have to decline drastically relative to the number of people. The two other benefits obviously are farming is cruel and to what extent and how you view animal consciousness is your own element. But I again see it it's hard to ignore that there may be the opportunity to prevent lots of suffering in animals. And then the last part is health, which is when I made the decision to try going vegan for a month, I had never felt better. I feel pretty good most of the time anyway, but I definitely had more energy. I'd lost weight. My body was in better shape. So there's kind of 3 reasons, but the environmental one to me is the one that everyone can presumably engage with. So for us, that mission is core to the business. We try and peddle that message in a way that is logical and not too fanatical, because I think people don't respond well to that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you mentioned briefly that you had tried a plant-based diet. What was your experience when you did do that?
So we basically, I think 2.5 years ago, I think the team here said, look, why don't we do, I think I suggested, or we were talking about things that were important to us. And one of them was the idea of essentially the environment and the fact we were a plant-based business. And so I wasn't vegan and was essentially just an omnivore, and basically said, well, why don't we document my journey for a month where I talk to different people about who are also vegans, and that we like make this a whole thing. And then after a month, I was kind of like, actually, this is really great. And I feel good, and I feel consciously good I feel emotionally good that I'm sort of in my very small way controlling some element of my position in the food chain, and my carbon footprint. And so I just carried it on. And actually, weirdly, another one that people kind of often forget is vegetables are a lot cheaper than meat. If you go into a restaurant and they have a veggie option on a menu, it's always the cheapest thing on the menu. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not the most enjoyable. Again, that's perspectives. Some people cannot live without a steak, which I totally get as well. So I ended up being very, very strict vegan for a whole year. And then today I'm probably at the margins, things like dairy occasionally. Like if there's milk in a fridge and I wanted a cup of tea, I would probably have milk. But in general, I try and stick to that diet. And again, I, do it without trying to make it my mission to tell everyone I'm a vegan. So yeah, it's been a cool journey. And I think it's clearly becoming more and more mainstream. People are, I think the growth rate, I think 5% of the UK is now either vegan or vegetarian. And obviously that's growing, which is really exciting. We need the world to get on board with it too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely hugely pushed by things like Veganuary back in January, and obviously the work that companies like ours do. So actually from experience, I've found that whenever you talk about a plant-based diet kind of in society nowadays, you get it follows with lots of questions. So I thought I'd kind of go through a few, which I've kind of found are quite common, and just see what you thought about them. So obviously people are kind of into their fitness a lot nowadays. And one of the key things people ask about a plant-based diet is what are the best ways to get protein for a vegan?
I mean, any of the, if you head down the pulses route, you're talking about all the beans, you're talking about even pea, like our pea soup. We actually add a bit of pea protein into our pea soup to make it have slightly more a thicker texture and a higher protein count. But it is literally not something I go to the gym a good amount, have always done. And the truth is, if you eat a well-rounded plant-based diet, you're going to get enough protein. You may not get enough protein if you are essentially actively trying to build muscle in a way that, if you're trying to do that on a gym program, because you are really focused on that, you can then supplement in the same way you would with normal protein using pea protein or pulses protein or whatever it might be. But it honestly has not for 1 second ever affected my energy levels, my ability to be in the gym or be in good shape. And so, yeah, I mean, all of those things essentially contain protein. Yeah. How do you think the protein in a cow exists? It's coming from plants. So
yeah, sure.
So it's just not been a concern. I've never been a guy who's interested in putting on tons of muscle. I'm trying to get rid of quite a bit of fat instead because I'm now old. So it's a different challenge.
Yeah. Yes, kind of continuing the conversation about protein and gym and things. Supplements is another thing that gets mentioned when people talk about a plant-based diet. Things like B12 often come up in conversation. What are your thoughts on these?
I did that for the first month because that's what I was advised to do. And part of that journey was talking to a nutritionist so that we wanted to get a well-rounded view on it. And then the truth is, since then, I've literally just stopped. I think I ran out of the pot. And again, I've just not ever had any issue to mention. And I think I've had blood tests at the doctor, and I don't think I have anything above or out of the ordinary. So again, maybe I'm getting those from a booze-based diet on the weekend, but in general, in terms of supplements, there obviously is iron is one of the ones that some people are slightly anemic, the anemia is a massive spectrum. So it might be that you need iron in your diet. Lots of people who eat meat also need iron in their diet because their body doesn't absorb it in the same way or synthesize it in the same way. So you've got B12, you've got all those things. I'd say the truth is, if you're eating a well-rounded plant-based diet, I'm not sure there is a huge reason to supplement, but you should always be careful and you should always check. I think that's something you take on your own shoulders.
Yeah, no, that's good info there. So another thing that often gets asked is what you eat on a plant-based diet. Some people that eat meat often kind of get confused about what vegans actually do eat and whether they're just eating vegetables all the time.
Yeah.
But from your experience, did you have any hacks that made it easier? Maybe some foods that kind of were good replacements?
I mean, avo on toast with some chili flakes is like it's the king's breakfast. And to be honest, like cereal, if you can find lots of vegan cereals and then use oat milk, like you've now got a normal breakfast. So that bit's easy. Lunch for me is basically, there's plenty of salads. Like there are plenty of things you can do to make that more interesting. I mean, the issue is now if you're cooking at home, that's one thing. You still have to cook. If you're going to Marks and Spencer's, there's just infinite opportunities to, like, for me, buy a salad, some artichoke hearts that they've already got pre-prepped. And for me, it's always chili. I just then bang a bunch of chili in it. And like that to me I'm fairly happy. In terms of cooking at home, like, you know, if you want something that you're more filling things, you've got roasting sweet potato, I certainly can't make a nut roast. Like I can't do that, but that again, most pubs can now do that. So that's awesome. And then the Labricams, shout out to their one. And then also at home, my standard, by the way, is just buy a bunch of vegetables, chop them up, chili. I'm like obsessed with just having spicy food, like, and then bang it in a pot and some soy sauce. And that's basically what you've got. Really, like, and that's it. And like, for me, it also means, because calorifically, you know, being full is all about volume. And the issue is that like, there's a danger that like high calorie per volume foods, like you can eat a shitload of carbs in a sitting that don't necessarily fill you up. So that if you're worried about your calorie intake, but vegetables is like, it's great. Yeah, like you can just eat a giant bowl of fried vegetables, you know, and you're done. It's easy.
Something like a kilo of vegetables is the same as about 4 Brazil nuts, isn't it?
Well, there you go. Yeah. And I just want to be full. So for me, spicy flavors, everything, and saltiness. So
yeah, for sure. If you were to explain to an alien who knew nothing about diet what the reasons to go plant-based were, what would you say?
Okay, there are 2 types of things you can eat. There are things that move around and have eyes and a brain, and they're like animals like us. Or there are these things that grow out of the ground and don't move around, don't talk and don't think. Yeah. You can eat both. And then I'd say, what's your home planet like? And they go, oh, it's wonderful. It's like, have you seen Lord of the Rings? It's like Hobbiton. That's where we live, in these little holes. And I would say, well, if you had the choice between it all going up in a ball of flames eventually, and war and famine, like, and if you eat one, it goes one way, and if you eat another, it goes the other way, which one would you eat? And I'd go with the one that grows out the ground and doesn't walk around the thing. So that would be broadly, and I don't think the alien, if they did even speak English, would understand what said. So that's my complicated answer to a good question. Yeah. But broadly, again, I just come back to, I can't, regardless of your moral stance, regardless of any view on health, like, we need the world to move to a 5:2 ratio of like days where you eat meat, or volume that you eat meat. If you could just cut down your animal-based products to the weekends, we could all do that across the world, we would be looking at certainly a brighter future.
Yeah, a much better place.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we hope.
Yeah. So thank you for all of that. And finally, if you could provide one piece of advice to a meat eater looking to switch to a plant-based diet, what would it be?
Start with 1 day a week and move through 2, 3, 4, or 1 meal a day. I think it's easy to just say at lunch, I never eat meat. Like, if you do that, you're not compromising what is essentially your whole current lifestyle and trying to move it all to another. So I think you can do it 2 ways. You can try and go for a week, but the problem is with anything where it restricts something after a week, you kind of go almost the other way when you come back. So I would say, honestly, like, lunch, go plant-based for ongoing, and then see if you can move it more and more. I think that's it. And don't bore people with the fact you're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. People like to talk about the fact they're vegan when they are. Thanks, Ed. That's been really great talking to you. Is there anything else you'd like to say just to leave us with?
It's an exciting time. I think it's the first time where consumers are buying truly consciously, and whether that's a causal choice around businesses that, like, for us, we make plastic bottles, like that's a thing, but we've just cut off our carbon footprint by 50% of each bottle, because we're now investing in a more expensive but better for the environment product. What's exciting is the consumers coming on that journey. So unlike companies like The Body Shop or I mean, there are a bunch of them, but Body Shop's a great example. They were the ones leading the way and having to get the consumers to follow behind them. And today, I think it's becoming a given that consumers will spend with a moral code. And that's so exciting. So it feels like we, by de facto, ended up in a space where we just started a juice for health reasons. It's awesome that we're now morally in a good place and in as part of a movement that people are following. So yeah, that's it. It's cool. Consumers are so much more conscious of how and where they spend their dollars. And the fashion industry is one where that's starting to happen, because fast fashion's starting to get a bad name for itself, because yes, the t-shirt's £3, but why? And how much just excess product are we producing? So, the food environment and those industries are all moving. Yeah, so very good. It's exciting times.
Yes, definitely. So thanks again, Ed. That's been In Conversation with Ed Foy, the Creative Impact Awards 2020.